second.
Hello and welcome to the SportsWatch, where we discuss about everything that is sports in the world and also in Sri Lanka. And during this global pandemic, and where we've been compelled to be on quarantine, we decided that it'll be best if we can speak to an individual about how directly and indirectly this has affected people who are involved in sports, and who better to chat about that than Shanaka Amarasinghe, a lawyer by profession, but also a very respected rugby commentator and a sportscaster. Shanaka, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sudarshana.
Brilliant. Now, the last time I spoke with you, that was for another program where we picked up the Sri Lankan 15. That was over 2 months ago. We're still in quarantine. How are you holding up?
Yeah, I can't believe that call was over 2 months ago. I went through a lot of hardship and pain to find players to put into that 15, and I think it went pretty well. I think I got some feedback from some of the players that we picked as well, and that was nice to see. Unfortunately, today we have news, of course, that some of the a lot of the guys that were coached on that team by George Simkin, that we've heard news of his passing in New Zealand, and that just cuts across a lot of generations of Sri Lankan rugby players. What a brilliant coach he was. Started off with that Candy Super Sevens up in Nittavala, and then really expanded rugby in Asia. What a brilliant coach he was, and a brilliant administrator of the game of rugby. And I think a lot of Sri Lanka's players from the older generation are feeling very sad at his loss today. And I think I have to add myself to that list as well, even though I never got to be coached by him. I really watched a lot of coaching that he did, and spoke to a lot of players he was coached by. And it really is a very sad bit of news that he's passed on. But that's the story. I mean, nothing is permanent. Lots of brilliant people come our way and then go their own way as well. And that's, I think, how we have to view the pandemic as well. Sudarshana, it's not easy to hold up in situations where I think a lot of younger people, like players who are used to going for practice every day, playing some sort of sport, going out into school, expending your energy. I think it's probably been the hardest on those people. For us who are a little bit older and probably don't have as much energy pent up, it may be easier to stay in the house. But I feel for a lot of the young kids who would have been playing their final years in whatever sport that they were doing. I think it's cut across everything, whether it's tennis, swimming, cricket, maybe towards the latter half of the latter end of the cricket season, of course, but the rugby season never really got going. And so there's a lot of people who will be very disappointed and frustrated as to what's happened here. And hopefully they'll be able to let that go and see this as just a small blip. And maybe it will give a lot of these players perhaps a little bit more impetus to continue playing club rugby, perhaps. And maybe that will inject a little bit more numbers into club rugby in the next season. Who knows? That's something I'm having my fingers crossed for.
All right, absolutely. And I think condolences to the family of George Simkin as well. He's one of those coaches who've done a lot to Asia rugby. He coached Sri Lanka, he coached Hong Kong, he coached China. And he's a person who's really, really done a lot to mentor the upcoming generation. Now, Shanaka, we spoke about how it's difficult as a player when you're, especially if you are a young player who's in your final year of school, not being able to finish your schooling career on a high because of this pandemic. But talk about the fans who are cooped up at home with not having any sports to watch. How difficult is that? I mean, I know you're a very, very eager rugby supporter, and also not many know that you're a very eager. You used to be a very eager football fan, not although you're not anymore. So do tell us how difficult it is to be a fan, not watching any live sport.
It's tough, Sudarshan. I have to admit, it really is tough. And I found out that I have my cable connection almost purely for sports, and I don't watch really pretty much anything else on television. So that was what it really was for. And I'm now wondering whether it's worth my keeping some of the channels that I have as well, because then I just need the sports channels. But the fact is that it's been really, really difficult because it's a kind of a distraction from our daily lives, and you look forward every time we go into work. And I guess you and I are a little lucky that we work somewhat in the sports arena, and the sports is part of our daily jobs. But there's a lot of people who've played sport in school, love sport, may even not have played sport, but just love sport. And they're forced to go into jobs, Sudarshana. We know how it is, right? I mean, you don't often get to choose your career. There are very few people who do get that privilege. So a lot of people go into their jobs, and the weekend is what they look forward to. They look forward to going and supporting their team, whether it's Liverpool, whether it's the All Blacks, whether it's the Springboks, whether it's India cricket, Sri Lanka cricket. It doesn't matter what it is. Across the globe, you've got this phenomenon where people talk about last weekend's games on the Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday they will look at the team selection for the upcoming weekend. And then on Thursday and Friday, they'll be making their predictions. And then on Saturday, they will have the game, or on Sunday or Friday or Saturday, they'll have the game. So you have that kind of pattern that has woven into people's lives. And I think we begin to expect it quite early on in the year, with the schools starting their rugby season in March, just after cricket season. And then, of course, you've got the international rugby season. Then after that, you perhaps maybe the club season starts. And you've got Formula One that starts in January and then goes on till about September or October or even November sometimes. So you've got sport going on all around the year. You watch one rugby match on the Saturday, you've got your Formula One game. On Sunday, you may have your Wimbledon finals. You remember last year we had to switch between the Wimbledon finals and that amazing Cricket World Cup final. So there's so much hope and kind of anticipation in sport that I really don't know how people are getting by, because there's a huge chunk of that anticipation and just stuff that keeps you going week after week after week. That's been taken away from their lives, and that can be quite mentally taxing. And I don't think enough credit is given for the kind of what's the word, a balm almost, a kind of just little covering sheet that you place over your life that sports is.
That's right. Now, you like you said, sports is such an uplifting factor. A lot of the people have in their life in order to be able to cope up with what's going on. But you being a very, very ardent fan of a lot of sports, how are you coping up, or what is your mechanism, and what have you turned to in order to cope up with the like a sport?
Well, I think I really have to begin by saying, Sudarshana, that I and maybe you also, and a lot of our friends, were in that segment of demographic of society, I should say, that is able to have internet on call, on demand, almost. So I've been really lucky in that regard. Just been watching a lot of Netflix in the midst of doing some of the work that has been coming in from office. But watching a lot of sports. I've just gone through the whole All or Nothing series from Manchester City. I'm just in the midst of watching the Test, which is the story of the Australian Test team in the last couple of years. So it's difficult to find some of this stuff because you have to maybe download torrents or something like that, because some of these things are not free to air. And I've been watching the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, as well. And that's taking up a significant chunk of my time, which is great. Other than that, I've got a lot of old rugby matches. I think I've got more than 100 All Blacks rugby games on DVD. So that was a birthday present from some time ago, and I've now broken it out and watching a few games here and there. Luckily, some of the World Rugby feeds and some of the All Black Facebook feeds as well are showing some of the older games and the World Cup games as well. So there's a bit of that happening. And of course, if you're a cricket fan, then there's plenty of Indian cricket on the Star Sports channels on your dial-up TVs as well. So there's that to watch if you are a cricket fan. But they're going back, and they're doing a few interesting documentaries on the Olympics as well. We all know that the Olympics this year has been postponed to 2021, but that doesn't mean that all the programming they did in the lead up to that needs to go away as well. So there's quite a few historical dramas and stuff that surround some of the older stars that maybe some of the younger kids don't know about. So I would really recommend that you watch those stories and maybe get a bit more of an education. It's more about finding out the history of your sport, which makes you appreciate it a little bit more than just watching game after game every weekend and just cheering a team. You actually appreciate a lot more about your sport. when you know about its history, you know the players, what the journey it has taken to come to this space. Like, for instance, you can't talk about T20 cricket without looking back at the World Series cricket that Kerry Packer started back in the 70s. So things like that, you have these watershed events in sports as well. And now that we've got a bit of downtime, it wouldn't hurt to just go back and, if you're not on the field, just learn a little bit more about what your sports were and how it came to the point where it has been. So that's what I've been doing as well. I've always been a pretty avid reader on stuff as well. So the Eddie Jones biography is next on my list. I've managed to get through a few books as well in this lockdown, which I don't do often enough as I should. But that's what I've been doing in to fill the void left by sport.
Very interesting because some of the things that you mentioned, Shanaka, I think a lot of people, a lot of us have turned to that to make sure that our time is filled. And something a lot of people don't know is the fact that Shanaka is actually a yogi and has been conducting few yoga classes. Now, do tell us about that as well, because I'm sure that is something that's really helping you to get through the day, and also you teaching it to others would be really uplifting factor for you.
Well, we got some great feedback from some of the regular students, Sudarshana, in the sense that I teach a couple of classes every week, and a lot of those students have reached out and said, thanks for teaching this stuff on Instagram as well. And got a few new people joining as well who have never tried yoga before and now have nothing to do, so they're happy to try it. So it's one of those periods where gyms have become really obsolete because nobody can go and work out at a gym. And I know one of my friends at his gym, he's just taken all the dumbbells, all the kettlebells, all the equipment from his gym, and he's distributed it to all his clients, which is, I thought, a fantastic move. And when the gym opens up again and it's safe to work out in a group, then they'll obviously bring it all back and they'll do it the way they're used to. But it's really nice that at least a person with a couple of dumbbells or just even one dumbbell and a kettlebell at home, there's so much you can do with a good trainer to help you out. But yoga is one of those things that you don't really need any equipment at all. You need a mat, and a mat you can make your mat out of anything really. Even if you don't have a mat, you can hold up a bed sheet and put it on the floor, and that'll help you in some of the poses as well if it's too hard to do it on the floor. So yoga is one of those things I realized that when I've like in my younger days, I would have played rugby and water polo and basketball and all games that are really hard on the body, Sudarshana. And you don't kind of appreciate how hard it is on the body until you get a little older, and then things start creaking and things start falling apart if you haven't really been looking out for it. And in the era that I played, there was not a lot of rehab, not a lot of good qualified physios going around. And so there were lots of injuries that maybe didn't get treated in the right way and didn't get rehabbed in the right way. So as a result of that, yoga's been this really amazing thing that I came to by accident. Because I had a knee injury and I really couldn't do anything else after my surgery. And then I came to yoga and I've been practicing it for about 10 years now. And it's just one of those things that you realize you can do even when you have no equipment, when you have nowhere else to go. You don't need a field, you don't need a ball, you don't need a teammate to throw something to. You don't need anything really, and it really helps you be with yourself as well. And as a result of that, it's also something that you can do into your 40s, where I am now, into your 50s and into your 60s. And my teacher, who gave me my teacher training a couple of years ago, she is into her 80s now, and she's been practicing yoga for more than 50 years. So it's something that you can take with you at a time when you can no longer run and cut and catch and bounce up and down on a basketball court or wear studs to the rugby field. This is something that stays with you. So I'm really glad I came to it at a time where I could make the transition kind of smoothly from this violent bashing that our sports give our bodies to something that has really helped me out now. And since I've started practicing, I know a lot of people who known me back then as well say that it's made a little bit of a difference in my personality as well. I don't know how far true that is, but that's the kind of introduction I had to yoga, and I've just been teaching for a year and a bit, and it's been really rewarding because you find people coming and saying, "Wow, that really made a difference." And that's what we want to do. I mean, whatever kind of sport you do, whether you are a coach in any kind of sport, or whether you're a yoga teacher or a Pilates instructor or whatever it is, you just want to know that the discipline that you're teaching someone is making a difference. And that's been great for me.
Oh, terrific story there by Shanaka. And also, I'm sure you must be very, very grateful for the fact that technology is so advanced now that you can be at home and continue teaching yoga to people who haven't even tried it and haven't bothered to try it. But just because it's available for to them through technology, and they just take it up.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic that the technology allows that platform. I know a lot of my friends who are yoga teachers have started teaching paid classes online. I haven't started doing that yet because I'm still in a little bit of a kind of a grapple with myself, thinking, is it fair to charge someone if you're not actually with them in the room and you're not helping them through? But I guess you are providing some sort of service, so it's justified to charge. But I just haven't got round to that yet. But yes, the fact that these platforms exist, that these various softwares exist, that you can have so many people on a screen doing a communal class, I think that's fantastic. And the technology, if it's used in the right way, it can really enhance what you do. It can reduce the time you spend on the road. It's so much more helpful than what we used to have previously. So I think this lockdown has really shown how technology can really minimize the time and physical effort that we need to take in going from place to place. And I hope things like working from home are things that we're going to take into the future as well, and not just something as a result of the curfew that we realize, okay, I'm going to organize my work week in a way that I need to have meetings on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And on Thursday and Friday, I can follow up on those meetings. I can make my phone calls and I can do everything I need to do from home. So technology has given us that. And I think companies will be quite happy if they're not if they can shut off AC on a couple of floors, or if they can reduce their electricity bill by about 10% every day. These are things that we need to look to in the future. But in terms of yoga teaching and all that, the internet and the software that we have, I use Instagram, but a lot of people are using YouTube Live and Zoom and stuff like that. So that's really helpful. But I really also need to caution people, Sudarshana, especially people who are new to yoga, that um, following a teacher on the internet is really not the same as having someone with you in class. And sometimes you feel that yoga is kind of really easy to do. Yeah, it's just stretching. How bad can it be? But when you actually get on the mat, you find out that it really is not as easy as you imagined it would be. So it's always helpful if you started off in this period. Please visit a class. It could be anybody's class, but go to a beginner's class, try and learn the fundamentals, try and get them to help you through the alignment, and then perhaps look towards following an app or following a teacher online or something like that. I would advise against following only an online yoga class or something like that. I would advise everyone to go to a class at some point as well to get the requisite knowledge. So while the technology is great, I think we mustn't kind of push the boundaries of the body. Just because technology is advancing so much doesn't mean our bodies are keeping pace with that. So that's one little caution I think we should put out there.
Very, very important advice by you, Shanaka. Now, thank you so much for that. I'm sure most of our viewers will appreciate that, and some of them will be tempted to try out a few things. If you want, you can visit Shanaka's Instagram profile. I'm sure he will be very much happy to try and help you tweak your techniques as well. And now, Shanaka, I did read one of these updates that was put out yesterday about rugby in New Zealand returning. Super Rugby in New Zealand returning. The five Super Rugby teams in New Zealand will be kicking off a, a competition inside the country for 10 weeks as soon as the threat of the COVID 19 pandemic is reduced to level 2. How good is that? And do you think that that is a model that we will be able to try and follow for sports to restart?
But I think New Zealand, in terms of not just rugby, but in terms of how they've handled this coronavirus, also is one of the examples that the rest of the world should be looking to follow. Sudarshana, because Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister, has come out and said, we've temporarily beaten this. So let's wait and see how it pans out. And then we should be ready to start training and playing anytime soon. So as you said, 10 weeks of competition with the five New Zealand franchises playing each other in a home and away basis for 10 weeks. That's going to be fantastic because the other Super Rugby franchises don't really bring much to the table anyway. So we really want to see these New Zealand franchises. So that's good to see that it's on the road to recovery. But I think we also have to really say that New Zealand is not the typical kind of country in terms of the coronavirus, Sudarshana. So I think we need to be a little bit circumspect in trying to go down the New Zealand road as well, because if you look at them, they've got two huge islands and 4 million people in those islands spread out over vast acres of space as well. So sometimes you've got one farm and acres before you go to another farms, and you've got little communities. And I think there was a meme going around, or an Instagram feed going around, saying that Scott Curry, who is the captain of the New Zealand Sevens team, and Sam Cane, who's just been appointed the captain of the New Zealand All Blacks. They both came from the same town in the Bay of Plenty, and the population of that town is 450 people. So you have to understand that when you say social distancing, New Zealand is already a vastly socially distant place anyway. And it's probably just in Auckland and a few neighborhoods in Wellington that you do find a high density of population. So that's why it was so much easier for them to beat this than it is for us here in Sri Lanka or maybe India or Indonesia. So I think we mustn't get too ahead of ourselves by thinking that we can do it if New Zealand did it. There are plenty of reasons why that has happened. And in a dense area like Colombo or Kandy, or in the areas where the curfew is still on, obviously populations are much closer knit. You've got far more people to a house than you would perhaps in New Zealand. You've got far more generations living together than you would. You've got grandchildren, parents, and grandparents as well, often in the same house. So the issues that we face here as a country to get sports started up are far greater, I think, and far more complex than New Zealand did. So it's great that New Zealand are off and running, and I think it's fantastic that we'll be able to see some live rugby sooner rather than later. But for us to get started, I think it's going to take a little bit more, Sudarshana. So we need to be patient and really make sure that we are doing as much as we can to up our own immunity, because we're going to come into contact with the disease at some point, perhaps. And all we can do is really change the way we live and the way we our approach to hygiene and stuff like that. So maybe using New Zealand as an example is maybe use New Zealand as an inspiration rather than an example.
Oh, absolutely, and I think it's important, like you mentioned, to know that our new normal is going to change from here on out, because with this pandemic, it's going to stay full, and we got to accept it. And how we play our sport, how we conduct ourselves, how we practice will have to change from here on. And also, even when the sport returns, for a while, I think it will be played behind closed doors, Chanaka.
Yeah, I think it will, and I think that's what the level 2 alert in New Zealand means. That all these games, the 10 weeks of home and away games that we're looking at, are going to be played behind closed doors. Now, I see the logic in that. Obviously, the probabilities of exposure are much less, but it means that you're acknowledging that the threat exists nevertheless. And when players train together, obviously, rugby, games like basketball, water polo, or whatever, even swimming, if you're training in a communal pool, are going to have higher degrees of threat than maybe if you're playing tennis, or if you're playing cricket, or if you're driving Formula One cars or Formula Three cars, whatever. So these games will have a different ratio of how people are exposed to it. So whether it's fine to have 10,000 people staying at home and watching it on TV, but you're exposing the 40 guys on the field to each other, and then you're exposing 40 different families, and into two or three, that's 120 different people when they go out. So all those issues are going to come up, and I think those issues are going to be debated for a long time to come. And I don't think there's a perfect answer either. And at some point, we're going to have to realize that we're just going to have to bite the bullet and go back to whatever the new normal is. People are banding about this term. Sudarshan is saying new normal, but I have absolutely no idea what that's going to look like.
Yes, that's true. I think a lot of the people use in that word. Even I did use that word as well. So that's something that we will have to get used to and try and figure out what it is all about. But Chanaka, thank you so much for joining us with this chat. I think we did manage to try and cover on how this quarantine has affected sports personnel and also people like us who are indirectly connected to sport. And do you think it's fair to say it has opened up other avenues for you to fill the time, and it has opened up maybe, like you said, you started reading again. Do you think it's a factor that sports has taken a lot of time of us?
Yes, I do think it is a factor, and I do think it is. It really does eat into the available time. But if you give that voluntarily, I don't think that's a problem. But sometimes you can maybe get a little obsessive. And at a time when I was waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning to watch Arsenal till 4 o'clock in the morning, and then go to the gym or go to work or something like that at 6:30 in the morning, then it gets a little bit obsessive and it affects the quality of your life. Fortunately, Arsenal have solved that problem for me by not getting into the Champions League for a couple of years now. But it does it does eat a lot into your time, Sudarshana. But then you have to also look at if people didn't follow it with this much passion, would we have as many jobs generated? You've got people in the sporting world, people like physios, people like trainers, people like assistant coaches. Like if a team has, say, an attack coach, a defense coach, a head coach, a kicking coach, a couple of trainers, a couple of physios, there's a whole economy that is making some money off this, and there's a whole bunch of families that depend on this kind of income. So that's going to be pretty hard hit. And I don't think if people didn't follow sports without this much passion, that you wouldn't create all these jobs for people to have. So I do take your point, and I think I would rather sports eat into my life rather than a 9 to 5. But you can't have it both ways. So at some point, you really have to find a balance. But I'm really happy that I've managed to get some reading done.
100%. Thank you so much, Shanaka. And I do agree with you. I'd rather have sports eat into my life as well. And that's why we are all sharing the passion. And thank you so much for joining us. I hope all of you did enjoy our chat as well. Next week, we will come back with another personality and we'll chat about how this quarantine has taken a toll on sporting action. Thank you, Shanaka.
Thank you.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this. And don't forget to hit the bell icon for our latest content.